Hello, my name is Charles Feldman.
And my name is Ela Edgar, and we're here for another episode of Trust on Purpose.
Thank you, Ela. And today we're going to go back into a subject we've talked about before, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, Ela, is tell the story that you told me a while ago. And we can use that as a jumping off point, because this is, I think, one of the places that we don't usually end up digging into, but I think needs to be understood better. Yeah. Repeat that story, please.
I'll tell the story. So I have the honor of working with I won't mention the client, but I love working with this client. And we had about 95 leaders in the room. And the topic was about the cycle of a commitment or making clear and complete requests. Now, interestingly, actually, this is a little side note. What the client had originally asked for was the art of delegation, which I'm planting here now because I think that's another episode that we want to do. I have personal beliefs about delegation. Anyway, so I helped refocus and steer them on, let's look at the cycle of a commitment and actually how to make clear and complete requests. So I'll give a little context in that we started with an exercise where I had everyone write a recent request and bonus points if they didn't get what they wanted. So bonus points if you didn't get what you wanted. We also did a show of hands. On average, how many of you actually get what you want when you make a request? So that was an interesting visual representation. I'd say maybe 60% of the room said, yeah, I usually get close to what I want. So interesting. We worked through the cycle of a commitment, talked about all of the different parts of it, which Charles, you and I have talked about before in a previous episode, so I won't go into detail. And then I had them go back to that request that they wrote and rewrite it in a way that makes it a clear and complete request. So that really sets that other person up for success, the performer up for success. So I gave them a few minutes to do that. And then I paused and said, as you look at this request, how many of you are feeling or thinking internally, I shouldn't have to do this? And I probably had about 30 participants raise their hand. And immediately, I'm like, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your honesty and transparency and letting us know that that's what you're thinking. But it also, right, wow, a little bit staggering to me, just the observer, the person that I am, in how strong that shoulding was. That I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to be so clear and articulate or detailed in my request. So I want to pause there and just let you jump in before we go further. What are you thinking?
Well, yeah, a bunch of things. Yes, I actually find myself thinking that at times too. It's like, why can't people just read my mind? What's the matter with people? Why can't they just read my mind and figure it out? But all kidding aside, I think that actually is a fairly common thought that people have, a fairly common sentiment that people have. When confronted with this, we're trying to help them recognize that the more clear and complete a request is, the more likely the other person then, when they say yes, knows exactly what's being expected of them. Or alternately, they can say, hey, you know what, I can't do all of that. There's some things that I don't have the capacity to do for whatever reason, or whether it's time or resources or whatever. Having all that information as the person who's being asked to do something is really valuable in terms of being able to respond realistically, right? Why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you just say, hey, yeah, of course, let's do that? But yes, here are a bunch of people, 30% of the people in the room who are saying, yeah, I shouldn't have to do that.
I shouldn't have to do that.
Like, okay, what are they thinking should happen? What do you think they're thinking should happen? If they don't do that, how is this thing going to work?
Oh my gosh. So I could tell that there were a couple of the participants that had indicated I shouldn't have to do this were quite dug in about it, right? So they sat a little taller, crossed their arms, like there was kind of like a stance, not a stance, like their heads tilted a little bit. You could see just the energetic and the physical repositioning of a body where like, I shouldn't have to freaking do this. This is ridiculous. And so I think there's varying degrees of how much shoulding, right? I shouldn't have to do this. And it could be on a 1 or a 2, or it could be what I sensed on a couple of them were like a Mach 10. It was like, are you freaking kidding me? If I think about or feel about where is that coming from, maybe part of it is I've done this so many times. I don't know why I have to repeat it again. That could be
Yeah.
one. I've done this. I've asked for this thing so many times, and I shouldn't have to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. From that perspective, there's already a background of obviousness, as we sometimes talk about it. Everybody
Yeah.
knows what's going to happen or supposed to happen. So yes, I would actually agree in that context when it's well known what to do, you really shouldn't have to do that. It's those times when there is no particular shared background of obviousness. That's when, yeah, I would agree. Sometimes, yes, all of that information that isn't a clear and complete request isn't needed or shouldn't be needed. And if it is, then something else is going on.
Right. So one of the things that's popping into my brain as we talk about this is, yes, I may have asked for this thing, this request. I may have made this request numerous times before. But just because we've made the request doesn't mean that the person heard it and understood it in a way that sets them up for success. So I think that's part one. And I'm making this part up a little bit. I'm making a bit of an assumption here. But with one of them in particular, my guess would be, although the request had been made a number of times, this wasn't the first time, my guess would be every single time the work product is delivered by the performer, I bet you it wasn't done the way that it was intended, right? And so the first time it happens is where we want to jump in, which we also know in working with lots of leaders doesn't happen, right? Because I don't know how to have the conversation. I don't know how they're going to take it. I don't have time for this. I shouldn't have to. All of that messy crap that happens.
Right.
And then the shooting actually, I feel like there's a huge resentment and frustration and what's another word? Like,
I think those two words are really good.
Yeah.
I think they capture both the frustration and the resentment that comes up for people.
yeah. And so if that's alive in our relationship, you may not know it, Charles, as the performer. I'm requesting that you be the performer in this conversation for a moment. As the leader, if I'm feeling shouldn't have to freaking tell you stuff, I've told you before, now I'm resentful and frustrated because I have a crap ton of things to get done over here and I really don't have time for your bullshit. Wow. That just made me really sad.
Yeah.
That just made me really sad. I'm so glad that that's not our relationship.
You and me
I'm
both.
shaking that off a little bit. Yeah. But can you imagine the impact of that in the relationship when that's unspoken? And that's the energy that this leader is bringing into.
So I had a coaching class, coaching a leader a while back, a few months ago, finished up. What often happened for this particular leader is he was impatient. So his sort of master mood, if you will, was impatience, which led to his making requests, but they were full of shortcuts that made sense to him, but not to the people he was making the requests of. Now, that wasn't across the board. There was two people actually in this particular leader's group that were able to kind of take what he said and put it together and make sense of it and come back with a product that was pretty darn close to what he wanted. But there were several other people in his group who couldn't. That didn't happen. And he was constantly frustrated and resentful. So mixed together impatience, resentment, and frustration. And
Ooh.
that's how he would often interact with these particular leaders. So the work that we did, he and I did together, was to help him slow down. And he found that when he did that, and when he, simple new practice for him, write out his request and then take it to the person and say, here's what I'd like you to do. And like go through all the pieces and then let the other person say what's missing. And then he'd say, what's missing? What more do you need in order to give me a good answer? It changed the dynamic considerably. But I think that's maybe part of what's going on often is there's an impatience in a sense of we've got to move fast. And that's not just in individual people, it's in the culture. It's in the soup that they're living in. Is that continual drive to move fast. So when somebody says, I don't have time for this bullshit, that matches perfectly the culture. So within the context of that culture, that makes total sense. I don't have time for this bullshit.
I literally don't have time for it. Yeah. I can't remember the exact quote, so I'm going to butcher it. So I'm sorry, Brene Brown. But it's basically like we either spend the time up front or we spend a whole lot of time on the back end fixing, coaching, resolving, problem solving. And so it was really interesting as I, again, was looking at these lovely humans. The question that was floating around in my brain, and I didn't ask it, but I'd be curious to, is are you more committed to I shouldn't have to? Or are you committed to actually getting the work done right or completely to your level of satisfaction the first time? And I think it's really easy to get dug into the whole, again, I'm committed to, I'm busy, I shouldn't have to do this, this is ridiculous, they're incompetent, I don't have time for the bullshit. And so then we get stuck in that cycle and the influence of the culture, right? Where I don't have time for it. But are you committed as a leader to what are you committed to as a leader?
Right. Yeah, that's really an important question for those leaders. It is challenging because in the conversation before the conversation, I told you about a different team that I worked with some years ago, where the leader of the team, there was one person who seemed to be able to take his somewhat vague requests, sometimes weren't even spoken as a request, and go off and come back with what the leader wanted. And that was not the case with anybody else on the team. And so he regarded them as, sort of slackers almost, compared to this guy who was a real go-getter and really kind of, proactive. And so that is challenging right there. That I see that often. There'll be one or maybe two people who somehow, read the leader, read what they want in a way that other people don't. And so they're comparing, which of course we just automatically do as human beings. Part of our brain is set up to do comparison, and we do that comparison. And here are these real champions, and then here are the rest of the people but
here's the rest of the schmucks.
Yeah, right. That is not fair to those other people at all.
No, not at all.
Because you're never going to get a whole team full of people like that one or two. It's not going to happen in the world. So can you then take the time to make more clear and complete requests for those people who aren't somehow tuned into you in the way that you would like and that you expect? Take that extra time so that you do get just as good a result from them as from the other people. You just have to invest a little more time to get the result.
And there are things that are completely obvious to me that would not be obvious to you. Even if we narrow that scope into, as professional credentialed coaches running our own businesses, there are things that you're like, oh yeah, this is how things flow. This is how I do things. And I'd be like, wow, that's really fascinating. I had no idea. Yeah. Of course, this happens in a work environment, in a team, different leaders. I'm onboarding someone new. They came from a completely different organization. We have our own standards, protocols, systems. Like there's just so much that could be not apparent or not right in front of this person's nose. So I think it's, again, we go back to how are we? I'm holding up my sweet little heart. Oh, I have a new heart provider. You guys are gonna like, these new hearts are spectacular. A shout out to Marliese, you are brilliant. It's a reminder, again, like none of us know everything about everything. And none of us actually even know everything about our jobs.
Including the leaders.
Including the leaders.
And they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
You leaders out there who might be listening, you're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to. So, again, how are we providing enough or relevant data to set the performer up for success? But I want to poke also at I'm using the word kind of high performer, this lovely human that could take this incomplete request and still deliver. And I'm super curious at what the cost is to that person. So I want to interject a tiny little story. I worked with a client earlier this year, and one of the leaders chatted to me on one of our breaks about clear and complete requests. And he said, I really like to give my team the freedom to be able to deliver and to, have space and time and, whatever it is, use their own creativity, their own intelligence, their own experience to deliver. And I'm like, that's great. And have you asked them for feedback about how does that work for them? Because the story, and I said, this is a story I'm making up in my brain. If you were my leader and you did that to me, I would spend a ridiculous amount of time spinning, trying to figure out what you wanted. And if what I was producing for you was too much, too little, too right, too left, too blue, less purple, like I would spend a ridiculous amount of time spinning. And I don't know about many of you, but even in my own world right here, I don't have time for spinning. I manage my energy, my resources. I try and manage them well. And so spinning takes away from something else that I could be focused on or getting done. And he found that fascinating. He's like, I never thought about, I thought I was giving them space to be and space to do the work. I never thought about the cost of not giving them enough detail.
Yeah. I think that's probably pretty accurate. Well, yeah, I think there are probably those people who would react like you do, or you would imagine you would if you had really sketchy, minimal detail and at the same time wanted to perform really well, which there's going to be a lot of people like that in any company, in any high-performing team for sure. So all that spinning, I will say in the context of the two stories I just told, both of those, or all three, I guess, two of them in one company and one in another, actually enjoyed what they did. They enjoyed, and it didn't seem to be a burden for them. Now, who knows 5 years down the road whether that might have changed.
Right.
In the context of these situations in these timeframes, which were somewhat recent. Well, actually, one of them was a few years ago and one of them was much more recent. But the people really enjoyed being able to perform at the level they did and please their boss in the way they did. So again, I think really it's a testament, if nothing else, to the enormous variation in human beings, how we see the world, how we operate in the world, and to sort of privilege one person's way of operating over others and saying, this is the right way. Yeah, that's going to be a problem for any leader. Eventually, they're going to find themselves with one person on the team who is the right way and everybody else is. And then what do you do with that?
Right. It feels like the resentment and the frustration would just keep gurgling and bubbling and getting higher and higher. And well, then no one really on the team is successful.
Yeah. Even that one high performer, because they're going to eventually be kind of set aside. They're going to lose some connection with the other people on the team because suddenly they're getting the plum assignments, the best treatment, the best raises and bonuses, and so on and so on. And everybody else is going to be resentful of them.
Right. Yeah. And there we cause that division, that withdrawal, where the rest of the team is now about this person.
So and so, yeah.
And again, like the impact and the cost to not just individual production and team production, but how you feel about coming to work. And I also tied in the quadrant of care and how important it is for employees and leaders to know what I do, how I contribute is valued. And we have a shared care. So maybe we've got some crunchy spicy as humans, like we're never going to be BFs, never going to hang out after work, but we both care about X. And so in order for us to be working together and aligned in delivering that particular outcome, how can we come from a place of care for each other in order to do that?
Care for each other that may in fact be driven by care for the mission, care for what we're doing as a team, what we're up to as a team. And still, it works.
Yeah.
It creates a bond.
Yeah.
The other place that I spent time was in that area of feedback. So the work has been performed, delivered, right? Are there any gaps? Do we need to close gaps? And so how does that conversation happen? And how much easier it is when our conditions of satisfaction are so clear. We can pinpoint to, here's what you did, here's why that mattered, please keep doing it. So what, now what? Or here's what you didn't do, here's why it matters, and I need you to take care of that today, or the next time you do this particular task, I need you to make sure that that part is included. And what support do you need to do that? Yeah. And it was fascinating because I think part of this shoulding conundrum is, if I'm so kind, take time and provide someone with a clear and complete request, well, then they're probably not going to be accountable. And so do I have to sacrifice accountability
Yeah.
when I take the time to do this? And you and I both know, no, not at all.
Well, it's interesting. And I've had this conversation with, I don't know how many people I've done a cycle of commitment work with, how many teams. And that piece, that final piece, yes, thank you. Thank you for doing this. And you did it just perfectly or close enough or whatever it is. That piece gets left off. Nobody bothers with that. So they're complaining of lack of accountability, but they don't even take the opportunity to create accountability.
Right.
It's just, okay, here it is, done. Now you have to run off and do the next thing that I want you to do. And it's just so simple to complete the cycle by saying, thank you, you have done what I wanted, or like you said, thank you. And there's a couple things that are not quite what I was expecting. Here's what they were. Let's talk about it.
Why can I never find the books on my bookshelf that I want to point to?
I don't know.
And I try and remember them by color. So I was pretty sure this was a red book. Anyway, sorry.
What's the title?
It's called Burnout.
Oh, I don't think I have a copy of that.
We will add the authors in here.
In the show notes, yes.
Yeah, in the show notes. But I really love tying their work into this cycle of a commitment. And so their theory and approach is that often burnout comes because we don't close the loop, that we leave it at, 97%, 98%, 84%, but we never actually close the loop, which this is my own personal vulnerability in this moment. My laptop has 27 tabs open all the time, and I often don't know where the music's coming from. Like literally that's how my brain functions and my desktop. And that sometimes causes me to not be able to focus, right? There's too many things, or if I'm working on something that isn't clear, I'm spinning about it. So what they're saying is that, linguistically and from a burnout reduction standpoint, close the loop completely to 100%. So thank you. Here's what you did well. Here's what I'd love you to keep doing. In the next time when we make a request, we'll follow the same cycle. But for now, we are 100% complete. Nothing else is required on this scope of work or this piece of work. And that loop closes figuratively and literally, and both parties can go on to whatever's next. And I love that analogy of like closing the loop. And actually, when I asked this particular group of lovely humans, what's one thing that they were taking away? One of them said, like, I'm going to be really intentional about closing loops
That's great.
for me and for the other person.
Yeah.
And I'm like, heavens have opened and the angels are singing. Thank you for that commitment.
Yes. Yes. That is fantastic. Like I said, so often in groups I've talked to, they never even thought about that. Maybe a thank you.
Maybe.
But that doesn't really close the loop.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I joke about this a little bit because, you know, Canadians are so polite. We say thank you and please for everything, apologize for things we haven't done. And so it's a bit of a giggle, kind of, but it's not really that we say thank you for things that we're actually not even satisfied with.
Yeah, well, you're not alone in that. I think that's a kind of a common situation, actually. And there's multiple reasons for it. We've touched on one. People are so busy. Thank you, and then we're done. I just get out of my office or whatever. Or, I got to send this email to say thank you, but I'm just going to send it quickly and nothing else. It's in part coming from that same cultural crush to get so many things done so quickly. We're so busy. We've got to get all this stuff done. We're running in circles. And so that seems like almost an afterthought that's not necessary. They're not realizing the value, like you're saying, of closing that. So yes, yay for that person who said, I'm going to pay attention to that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, well, and this is so funny. This popped into my head just now too. I can imagine that people are like, I shouldn't have to thank people for doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And if that is the stance that you want to take, what's the benefit of that and what's the cost of it? As long as you're clear and you've thought about that. But my guess from my heart is that people would appreciate having the loop closed and knowing that they've done a job according to how it was asked for. Not good job, not an attaboy, but you performed and you delivered in a way that aligned with what I was asking for. Here's why that matters. Here's why I'd love you to do that again.
Yeah, that's really important. I think for people's general well-being, mental health, if you will. And what's the thing that's always mentioned? Employee, these surveys, employee
Engagement.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
If only I could have you with me all the time to fish those words out. I would sound so much more intelligent. Employee engagement. Yes. It's one of those things that I think really does help with employee engagement. Well, I think we probably ought to wrap this one up. We've covered some really useful ground for people. I hope you, as listeners out there, have taken something of value from this conversation for yourself, for your teams, for your coaching clients, for your clients as HR professionals. Well, go ahead. You're about to say something. So.
Yeah. No, I was just giggling. There was a table at the front that after we dug into shooting a little bit, like they were joking about and realizing how much shooting actually goes on in our everyday world. And so they were amplifying it and having fun and playing with it, which I love. And so I guess my invitation as we close this is pay attention to when you're shooting on yourself and when you're shooting on others. Is that serving? Is that supporting you or the other person? And if not, then what do you want to do differently? Or what do you want to add in addition to? Or is there a missing conversation or is there something? And just notice how ridiculously often we say should.
And shouldn't.
We do a lot. And shouldn't. Yes.
Yes.
All that shoulding.
That shouldn't be. They shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be saying that. They shouldn't blah, 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 blah. And I shouldn't be saying this and I shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, where do we get that? Anyway, thank you so much. I think this has been a really interesting conversation, worthwhile, I hope. And I hope you listeners have taken something useful from it. And until next August,
Until the
September.
fall.
The fall, yeah.
Until the fall. September. Yeah. Charles and I are going to take a break.
Yeah. We will be running some of our past podcasts during that period of time. So stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, have a wonderful summer, and you'll hear us in the fall and maybe even see us.
You might see us. Yeah, let's drop that little surprise. You might actually see us. Woo! All right. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
On behalf of both Charles and myself, we want to say a big thank you to our producer and sound editor, Chad Penner, Hillary Rideout of Inside Out Branding, who does our promotion, our amazing graphics, and marketing for us. And our theme music was composed by Jonas Smith. If you have any questions or comments for us about the podcast, if you have a trust-related situation that you'd like us to take up in one of our episodes, we'd love to hear from you at trust@trustonpurpose.org.
And we'd also like to thank you, our listeners. Take care and keep building trust on purpose. Until next time.
Until next time.